So let's go through a few other lines now. After d4, d5, c4, and knight c6, bishop f4, we have to take the pawn, and after white advances the pawn in d5, we attack the bishop. We went through moves like bishop g3 and also pawn takes knight. Let's go through another move like, let's say, bishop c1. Not bishop d2 because then we can take a pawn in d5, and bishop e3 runs into knight to b4. And this move comes with a massive threat. Basically, if black gets to play bishop f5, it's already over, right? If black gets to play again bishop f5, and this is a terrible position to play for white. White pieces are paralyzed, and the only move here that makes sense would be something like knight a3, but then there is a similar plan that we've seen in the previous video. The thing is that the white player will not be able to reduce the initiative of the white player because this bishop here is impossible to be attacked, and even if white were to start storming pawns like h3, g4 or something like that, still h7 will just allow the bishop a shelter forever. It's just never going to be misplaced from f5. So that's what happens if black gets to play again. If black doesn't get to play again, well, the thing is simply we are putting too much pressure on this pawn, and it cannot be defended by another pawn because the bishop went to the silly e3 square. And obviously a check is not a problem because of bishop d7 developing with tempo. The bishop is protecting the knight. The queen will have to go literally all the way down, and then we can play bishop f5 anyway with the usual threats. So here we are. After white pushes the pawn in d5, we push the pawn in e5, and the bishop goes back to c1. Let's look at this idea. So why are we looking at this move? What are the chances that this move will happen? Well, there's plenty of chances that this move will happen, especially considering how wrong things go when the bishop goes to g3 or when the bishop takes the pawn, or when there are all the swaps that we saw in the previous video. And well, the most important reason why we're looking at this kind of line is because we got to look at the patterns and understand how to start exploiting in our advantage the position that all the positions that arise from the Chigorin. So now we play bishop to c5. This is an excellent move. We don't worry about our knight getting taken simply because of a very basic tactic. Bishop takes f2, check, king has to take. The only move which is possible, and then we take the queen. So this move is about development, right? If there's no like 100% urgent need to remove the knight from then let's not do it. So bishop c5, and after e3, now we have to move the knight, of course, because we don't have that tactic. So knight to b4 now. The idea is, guess what? To play bishop f5, and let's say, for example, if we get to move again, bishop f5, and clearly we're going for this, knight c2. And a move like knight a3 is met by b5. The knight can't take the pawn because of the threat of winning a lot of material. And then after a move like bishop to d2, trying to get rid of the knight, we play a6. And we're keeping the pawn advantage that we got at the beginning forever. This is a chain of pawns that it's just safe, and there is no compensation for white. And then, well, the game continues. So I'm not going to continue through this line because we played that extra move. So that's not really supposed to be. But that's the plan we're going for. So here, after knight b4, let's look at this move, right? The most normal move we can imagine. Bishop takes pawn in c4, re-winning the pawn. Well, we play bishop f5 anyway. Now the best move for white is queen to a4 check. We don't have a reason to go to d7. It's not like we're supposed to remember all the times that the queen can go to a4 and all the times that we should put the bishop in d7. Of course, it doesn't work like that. What you need to remember is whether your attack is coming with a tempo or not. Bishop d7 is coming with an attack on the queen, but not with a tempo, because the queen will just move away to another square, like here. The queen is not going back to d1. You're not winning a tempo. And also, your bishop is just doing fine in f5. You don't need to play bishop to d7 to attack the queen. So you're not winning a tempo here. You're just making the queen move, which is not necessarily an advantage. So after queen to a4, we play c6. And now we're still threatening knight c2. So if pawn takes, this is actually a little bit of a complication, but that's actually still okay. Well, this line has to be remembered like this. Well, if the pawn takes, here we have a typical pattern. We have the bishop in f5, the knight in c2, and the queen is going to that square. So the best move now is actually a very beautiful move. Bishop to c2, attacking the queen and threatening checkmate in one move in d1. So, well, if the queen takes the bishop, we're going to take this with we're going to take the queen, so that doesn't make sense. And if the queen moves away, well, the queen can't go to a5 because we can take it. a6 we can take it. b4 we can take it. a3 for example is met by checkmate. So the best move by white now is c7. This is the engine move that white plays right now, but we're going to take the queen, and after the pawn takes our queen with promotion, we're going to take back with the rook, and we have two threats going on. The threat of infiltrating with the rook in such an amazing square, and also the threat of knight c2. So the truth is that the white player cannot stop all of the threats. So the best move, the engine move, is knight a3. It stops black from winning just clearly a rook. And so what's the best move here? The best move is e4. This is stopping the knight from going to the natural f3 square. The knight would not be able to go to e2, for example, because of the threat of checkmate. The knight will not be able to go to h3 because of the threat of check. And then the king moves, and then we take the rook. And the bishop to d2 is the most normal move right now. This is met by knight to f6. So black's position is better, but let's just look at a few moves. What's the plan here? The goal is to do knight g4 and attack the square in f2 because we're attacking this bishop. We're exploiting the fact that the white player is not going to be able to castle queenside because of the bishop. So after a completely normal move like knight to e2, we can just castle. And I would just keep the pieces like that. This is one of the typical patterns here. The knight in a3 is there to protect the square c2, and it's kind of stuck there forever. It's not going to be able to be useful ever. So what happens after bishop takes knight? Well, then we just continue in such an incredibly pleasant position where we have the bishop pair and activated rook, and the white king loses the right to castle. So I think it's pointless to go through that, but we can just play like a move like knight to c3. This is met by bishop to c6, as the knight was attacking the bishop. And it looks like after all of these moves, only a few of them will be able to be remembered. But even though the patterns are the same, it looks like white has managed to create some sort of normal game, because now white can play a move like rook to d1, protecting the bishop, allowing the white player to castle, and this bishop will no longer be hanging because of the rook. And after this, the best move by black is a6. But black takes initiative already, because after this move, well, a6 clearly is played in order to play b5 and exploit the two weirdly placed knights, and white king castles b5. Then whatever the bishop moves, let's say bishop e2, we can gonna go to d3 and target the weakness on b3 and also a potential fork. And this position is like -3 at the moment, but it's not a super common line. Well, it does happen that they play the bishop all the way back to c1 in this opening, because they realize that bishop f4 should never be played against the Chigorin. It's good to know all of these thematic moves, because it all adds up to our Chigorin repertoire. So here we are back at the same position as before. After c6, as we mentioned, pawn should not take in c6. But let's see, how does white continue? Let's see, knight a3, which protects the c2 square. Now, yes, the white player is threatening to take the pawn because bishop c2 is no longer possible. So now we play a6, thematic move as well. We are threatening b5, making a fork. And so after queen to b3, removing the queen from the annoying fork, we still play b5, and then the bishop moves back. Clearly, the e2 is the only square. d3 was controlled by two pieces. Now the queen can take the pawn in d5. And black's position is amazing. We've got so many pieces developed on the fifth rank, one on the fourth rank, whereas white doesn't go further the third rank with any of the pieces. And this is just lovely. After a move like knight f3 and knight e7 and castle, black can play f6. This is the best move, and this also is a thematic move that happens a lot against the London system. We've encountered this move a lot. This is actually a safe chain of pawns, and the idea eventually, as you remember from the London video, is to play g4, g5, g4, h5, and so on. It's going to be safe. So let's continue development for the white player, and let's just go on a few moves to see a bunch of scenarios that can happen. After bishop to d2, the only square that is possible to develop the bishop in order to connect the two rooks, we can take the queen. Pawn takes back. We have doubled up and isolated the opponent pawns, and now we just play king to f7. The goal here is, if we had the chance to play again, would be something like knight e to d5, bishop to e7, preparing g5 and g4 and so on, and a move like bishop to d3, which goes on to forcefully swap the light squared bishop of our opponent. If they take us, we can take back with the knight. We have the knight in an excellent position. If they don't take us, we can take them. And eventually, the g5, g4 moves are coming, and white will have less influence over the light squares, and we can keep pushing. So, well, that's what we would like to do. So after a move like king f7, and white plays something like rook to c1, attacking the bishop, we could just play the bishop back. The idea now is to play knight to d3. So after, let's have a look at this other type of scenario, when they take our knight, because clearly our knight in b4 was just a monster, especially considering that these 2 pawns on the b5 were weak and they could never attack it. We take back, obviously. Let's just mention here that the goal is to play g5, h5, and so on. So let's have a look at just like how it would look like. We're going to be targeting, the goals are these ones. We're going to be targeting the weak pawn in b3, and after it gets defended by the bishop, that's the only move. Moves like g5 are absolutely possible, and if met by h3, for example, h5, nothing is stopping us from getting this king exposed. A move like g4 is not possible, of course, as it gets taken, and we're going to play g4 eventually. Besides, we're going to continue the game with the superior pawn structure and the bishop pair. Let's have a look at a move like g4, because sometimes they even think of potentially playing it. But the reason is simple. This is a familiar trick, because after take, we can't take the pawn here, right? Because we run into this check, and knight e5 check, and then eventually the bishop could take our bishop. So that's actually something that a lot of players play in these kind of positions, and you have to be wary of that. So there's one more line I want to go through just to have an excuse to recap, and also because I forgot to mention in the previous video. After bishop f4, we take the pawn, d5, we play e5, and now bishop goes to g3, we play knight to a5. Queen a4 check, we have to play obviously c6. And in the previous video we went through the whole b5 thing with all the pawn storm. What happens after pawn takes first? Then we have to take back, and only now white takes the bishop. White bishop takes the pawn back. Of course, queen c4 is not possible because we could take the bishop. But anyway, it's black to move. And what's our move now? We're going to play a6, exploiting the fact that we're still attacking the bishop. Well, the knight is pinned, yes, but when the queen goes to c4, in order to prevent us from creating this strong and solid pawn chain, then we will be able to take the bishop. So a6 looks like a slow move while we try to build b5, but it's actually not, because white has something to worry about, that bishop. So b5 is coming no matter what. So let's look at knight c3, for example. Well, if the bishop were to just go away, then we could still play just b5, right? We know it's happening. Let's look at knight c3. Why are we looking at knight c3? Because it comes with an idea. The idea is to attack b5 and exploit the fact that the pawn in a6 is pinned. Funny thing, we're going to play b5 anyway. So yes, the knight can take the pawn, but that's just falling for this. It's not a trap. It's just a calculation of compensation and a line that comes afterwards. So it's not like a hope move where we hope that that white will take the pawn. It will require the white player a very long calculation to figure out that this is not winning. So we take the knight and then we lose the rook on purpose. Then we take this bishop. So here we have the bishop pair and much better development. Yes, we haven't developed the pieces, but they're easy to develop, right? We got bishop b4 check coming here, the checkmate threat, and we still have the bishop pair, 2 advanced pawn on the queen side. So look at material. White has 2 rooks, a bishop and a knight. We have 1 rook, we have 2 bishops and 2 knights. And so how does white stop this threat already? a3, and now black continues with bishop to c5. Development, and now white will have to continue to develop. Let's just look at a few moves and then we can conclude it. Then knight to e7, we will eventually castle, and the knight's important to put in e7 because it protects the bishop. This will allow the release of the queen without having to worry about losing this bishop before we castle, because the knight is protecting it. And also the knight does have access to all the squares, so it's not there just for a defensive reason. How do we respond to a move like knight f3? Now we can take the knight and we break the pawn structure. It's not ideal to take back with the queen because we still have this move, queen to a5 check, and this fork doesn't work because we can just take and the rook is pinned and we're going to have a strong attack. So now we are misplacing the white king. After the king moves either to d1 or e2, either way our next best move is to castle, and this is not going to take long before we finish this off. Back this move, let's say knight takes and pawn takes. White is trying to speed up development like that, also because the bishop doesn't have a future from this diagonal, and he might think of, okay, I'm going to develop the knight, and then if black takes, and we do have to take, well, of course the white cannot take back with the queen because we saw queen a5 is a massive threat. White can take back with the pawn, and then potentially develop the bishop from a fianchetto. And maybe even if he looks crazy, he can just castle or even just play rook to g1 and not castle. But that's not ideal in this kind of open game when black has the bishop pair. It's not ideal not to castle. I mean, you got to castle.
Now black will have to castle anyway. The idea is to play queen to b6 and then bishop to b7, and black's pieces will be placed like missiles. So after castling and white develop the bishop, let's say bishop to g2 for example, queen to b6, the threat of bishop b7 now is very strong since bishop b7 traps the queen. So the queen will have to move. So there are no moves. The queen cannot go anywhere except e4. Everywhere else she will be taken. So black continues bishop f5. Black's got better material and better development. After bishop to f5, the queen will have to move. And after queen to, let's say, f4, black will finally place the bishop in d3 and stop the white king from potentially castling. And the game is over because the black player is threatening a move like queen a5, which is just deadly. Black is going to be on easy street, the checkmate. And now there's a threat of queen a5, which is a checkmate in 7 moves according to the engine. And clearly you can tell how this is just terrible, right? For the white player. The best move by white is rook to d1, but it doesn't stop black from winning. So now black plays knight to g6, and that kicks the queen away from the fourth rank. The queen can't go anywhere on these squares. So after queen to g3, now we can still play queen a5 check, and that comes with the deadly attack. White cannot do anything. So the only way to stop this would be to block with the rook or with the pawn in b4. If white blocks with rook, and now black takes advantage of the misplaced white queen to just reroute the pieces. So bishop e7 comes now. The idea is to play rook to d8 and exploit the pin of the rook in d2. So for example, rook to d8 and then moving the bishop away will guarantee black a win. Well, we don't get to play many moves in a row, but what can white do anyway here? If white tries to attack the bishop in e3 even further, then that's not a problem, because after f4, for example, we play bishop f6. So yeah, there's no stop from taking the pawn in b2, and afterwards the bishop will be able to go to c3 again. This can be done even after a move like pawn f5, because black just doesn't have to care about the knight being taken because of the threat. Bishop takes b2, and coming back here and going to checkmate soon. So after rook to d1, knight g6, and then the queen moves away to the only square that makes sense to go to, then we can make a check. If white were to play a move like b4, we can take en passant. And that's just going to be the easier way. After rook to d2, we can play b2, and that's going to be checkmate soon.